Thank you. Thank you. I am often asked, how is it that you're able to smile after living 30 years of pure hell? This evening I have been informed that quite a few of you heard my interview this morning on the radio. And I have been asked if I could elaborate a little more about the story. And I have a advantage. I'm the one that wrote the book. You yet to read it. And I feel that I'm at a disadvantage, so I'm going to start off by telling you how this all took place. But this evening, I want to start off by telling you that I wish that I could look you in the eye and tell you that the state of Alabama made an honest mistake. No one in this room could wish anything more than I do, and I wish that I didn't have to stand here and tell you that the state of Alabama didn't make an honest mistake. The state of Alabama knew that I was not the person who had committed those horrible crimes. I wish I could stand here today and tell you that race had nothing to do with me spending 30 years of pure hell in a 5x7. But race had everything to do with me spending 30 years in solitary confinement. On a hot day in July, I don't know how many of you ever been to Alabama, but if you haven't been to Alabama in July, please do not come to Alabama in July. It is far too hot. But my mother was in the kitchen, and I went inside, and my mother was making some lemonade. And I got a glass of lemonade, and my mother looked at me and she said, "Are you going to revival tonight?" And I said, "Yes, ma'am." For in the South, no matter how old we are, we say yes, ma'am, and no, ma'am, and yes, sir, and no, sir, out of pure respect for our elders. And I said, "Yes, ma'am." I got my lemonade and I went on outside, and about 15 minutes later, I goes back inside and to put my glass up. And there my mother was still in the kitchen, and she said, "What time do revival start tonight?" And I said, 7 o'clock, Mama. She looked at the clock and she said, "Well, you got time to go out there and cut that grass." I gave my mother this baby look because I am the baby of the family, but today it was not working. My mother looked at me and she said, "You said start at 7 o'clock?" I said, "Yes, ma'am." She said, "Well, you got time to go cut that grass." And I said, "Mama, I promise you, tomorrow I will cut that grass." My mother looked at me and she said, "I'm trying my best to see how did you'll cut the grass tomorrow out of me telling you to go cut the grass." My mother gave me a look that only she could give me, and I knew exactly what it meant. And finally she said, "Boy, you better get out there and cut that grass." I goes outside and I fire up the old lawnmower, and 25 minutes into cutting the grass, I just happened to look up. And there stood two white gentlemen that I'd never seen before. I cut the lawnmower off and I said, "Can I help you?" One of them replied, "We're looking for Anthony Ray Hinton." I said, "That would be me. Again, how can I help you?" They identified themselves as two detectives from the Birmingham Police Department. And I said, "Okay, how can I help you?" They said, "Well, we have a warrant for your arrest." I said, "For what?" They said, "We will explain that to you later, but right now, we want you to put your hands behind your back." I complied. I put my hands behind my back. They put the handcuff on me and proceeded to put me in the police car. And I said, "Hold up. At least allow me the opportunity to go in and tell my mother that I'm being arrested for something." One of the detectives said, "We can't let you go back in the house." And we argued for about 2 minutes. And finally, the other detective said, "Let him go in and tell his mother he's being arrested." I goes in, I don't say a word, I just take my hand and show my mother the handcuffing like any good mother. She began to scream and holler, "What are those handcuffs doing on my baby?" The detective said, "Take him out," and while I stay in here and talk to his mother. A few minutes later, he comes out and we proceeded to go to the county jail. And on our way to the county jail, the detective turned around and asked me, "Anthony, do you own a firearm?" I said, "No." He said, "Do your mother own a firearm?" And I said, "Yes." He asked me what kind, and I told him. So they decided that they would drop me off at a substation, turn around and go and talk to my mother, and she gave him the pistol. Every day somebody walk up to me that know about my case and say, "Why did you tell the police about a gun that they had no knowledge of?" I said, ever since I can remember, my mother always told me, always tell the truth. If you haven't done anything, you have no reason to lie. If you're running, while you're running, if you've done nothing. That day I told the truth. They turn around, they go to my mom, they get the gun, they come back and they pick me up, and we proceeded to go to jail again. I asked the detective at least 50 times, "Why am I being arrested?" They still wouldn't tell me. And as we drove a little further, for the 51st time, I said, "Detective, why am I being arrested?" And this seemed to set this detective off that wasn't driving. He turned around, he looked at me, and he said, "We're going to charge you with first-degree robbery, first-degree kidnapping, first-degree attempted murder." And I said, "Oh, you got the wrong person. I ain't done none of that." The detective looked at me and he said, "Let me tell you something, and let me tell it to you right now. I don't care whether you did it or didn't do it, but I want you to know for one thing, I'm going to make sure that you found guilty of it." I said, "For a crime that I didn't commit?" He said, "You must have a hearing problem. Didn't I tell you I don't care whether you did it or didn't do it?" He said, "You just remember that I am going to make sure that you found guilty of it." And as he drove a little farther down the road, he turned around with this smirk in his face, and he said, "And by the way, there's 5 things that are going to convict you." He said, "Would you like to know what those 5 things are?" And I said, "Yes." He said, "Number 1, you're black. Number 2, a white man is going to say you shot him, whether you shot him or not." He said, "Believe me, I don't care." He said, "Number 3, you're going to have a white prosecutor. Number 4, you're going to have a white judge. And number 5, you're going to have an all-white jury." He said, "Do you know what that spelled?" And he repeated the word conviction, 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 conviction. And as we got to the jail, they put me in this holding cell. And I was in there about 2.5 hours, and finally the detective came in and he said, I said, "Detective, can you tell me what date and what time this case or this crime took place?" He went through his note and he told me the date and the time, and I said, "Thank God. It couldn't have been me. I was at work at that particular time and that particular date." And I said, "Thank you, Jesus." My supervisor happened to be white. Here's his phone number. Here's the address to where I was working. You can go check it out. And he left, and about 4.5 hours later, they came back. He said, "I have good news and I have bad news. The good news is we no longer going to charge you with first-degree robbery, first-degree kidnap, first-degree attempted murder." He said, "Your alibi checks out." He said, "But now we have decided that we're going to charge you with 2 counts of first-degree capital murder." I said, "But I haven't killed anyone." He said, "You really need to do something about that hearing, because didn't I tell you on the way here, I didn't care whether you did it or didn't do it?" He said, "The same is in effect for these cases. I don't care whether you did it or didn't do it. But I want you to remember that I'm going to make sure that you found guilty of it. I said, but detective, I haven't killed anyone. The detective looked at me and he said, you know what? I don't believe you did it. He said, but y'all is always taking up for one another. Take this rap for your homeboy. And with tears coming down my eyes, I looked at this detective. And I said, detective, there's not a homeboy in this world that I would take a rap for like this. I goes before a judge, and the judge read me off the charges. He asked me, do I understand my rights? And I tell him yes. He asked me, can I afford an attorney? And I tell him no. He looked back in the courtroom and he called this attorney up front and he tell this attorney, I want you to represent Mr. Hinton on 2 counts of first-degree capital murder. The lawyer looked at me and he said, I did not go to law school to do pro bono work. I looked at this lawyer and I said, would it make a difference to you if I told you that I am innocent? He looked at me and he said, the problem with that statement is that all of y'all always doing something and then saying you didn't do it. This is the lawyer that I had to entrust to represent me on capital murder charges. I goes to trial and they found me guilty. The judge proudly stand up and tell me, Anthony Ray Hinton, you have been found guilty 2 counts of first-degree capital murder. And it is the order of this court that I sentence you to death. And then this judge had the audacity to say, may God have mercy on your soul. The prosecution ran out and told the media that today the state of Alabama got the worst killer that ever walked the street, off the street. Birmingham in particular. But it wasn't true. On December 17, 1986, I was transported to Holman Correction Facility, where they housed death row inmates. And once I got to death row inmate, they gave me a number, and the number was 468. And they told me that's who I was. Ladies and gentlemen, for the next 3 years, I didn't say a word to another human being. I was so angry, I was so hurt. All of my life, from the age of 4 years old, my mom made me go to church, and she made me believe in a God. And she told me that he can do everything but fail. All I had to do was trust in him. I was mad with God. I was mad with everybody. And I took the only book that they allowed us to have was the Bible. I took this Bible and I threw it up under the bed and I said, God, don't live here anymore. I kept wondering what type of God would allow an innocent man not just go to prison, but to death row. And for 3 years, I remained silent. And then early one morning, going into the 4th year, I woke up to the sound of a grown man crying. It was approximately about 1 o'clock in the morning. A man that I had lived by for 3 years and never thought to ask him his name, because I was not there to get to know anyone. I was not there to befriend anybody. All I know that I had been wrongly convicted. But my mother taught me compassion. My mother told me at a very early age, no matter what one does in life, he or she deserves compassion. And when I heard this grown man crying through this brick wall that separates us, I hollered, hey, is something the matter over there? Took this man a while to respond, and finally he said, I just got word that my mother had passed. I told him how sorry I was And I told him a corny joke. We both kind of sniggered a little bit, and I laid back down, and about 6 o'clock I woke back up, and I realized that my voice was back and my sense of humor was back. All of my life, I tell people, I was born with 2 things, if nothing else in this world. I was born to a mother who loved me unconditional, and I was born with a sense of humor. I'm just a big old country boy from Alabama that no matter how young you are, no matter how good looking you are, if I just happen to see you walking and you fall, I would be the first one to run, help you get up. I would ask you, are you okay? But the moment you say you're okay, I'm going to laugh at you for falling. I think laughter is good for the soul. But that morning, when I realized that my sense of humor was back, I sit on this bed that I had been sleeping in a fetus position because it was too small. I looked at my body and I told my body that the mind had to go. I said, in order for me to survive here, I got to leave. I couldn't leave physically, so I decided that I would leave mentally. It was as though my body looked back at me and said, do you promise to come back? I looked at my body and I said, I promise you I'll be back. Besides, I got to come back and check on this case. The moment I felt that my body gave me permission to leave, I left. Of all the places in the world to go, I wanted to go see Queen Elizabeth. Now, please, later on after this is over with, don't ask me why a 29-year-old black male would want to go see Queen Elizabeth. I don't know. But in my mind, that's who I wanted to see, and that's who I wanted to talk to, was Queen Elizabeth. I imagined in my mind showing up at the palace, telling the guard to tell the queen who I was, and I was there to see her. In my mind, the queen told him to bring me in, and I introduced myself to the queen. We sit down and we talked about Prince Charles, Prince William, Prince Harris, and of course, the tragedy of Lady Prince Di. And in this conversation, the queen realized that she hadn't offered me anything to drink. And finally, the queen looked at me and she said, Mr. Hinton, would you like some tea? And I said, I would love some tea. She said, what would you like in your tea? And I told her a spot of lemon. She told the butler to go out and bring this lemon. And in my mind, I squeezed this lemon in my tea. We began to talk some more. I finally stand up and tell the queen that I must be leaving. Now that I realized that I can leave and go wherever I want in my mind, I decided that I would do something that I said as a young boy I would never do, and that is get married. But I decided that I would get married, and I married the beautiful, talented actor, Halle Berry. Halle Berry and I stayed married 15 long years in my mind. And I must say, not knowing what marriage is about, Halle Berry was a perfect wife. Halle Berry never said nothing but yes, dear, and okay, dear. Whatever you want to do, dear, is okay with me. And then going into the 16th year, the prison did something that it rarely did for death row inmate. They showed us a movie, and the movie was called Speed. And there, for the first time, I laid eyes on the beautiful, talented actor, Sandra Bullock. I see this beautiful woman driving this bus. I'm looking at Sandra Bullock in my mind. I'm looking at Halle. I'm looking at Sandra Bullock as though I'm playing tennis. I know now that I must build my nerves up to tell Halle some tragedy news. Because I have already made my mind up. I looked at Halle in my mind and I said, Halle, I'm going to divorce you. And I'm going to marry Sandra Bullock. True to her form, she just said, okay, dear. And then the God interrupted his dream in my imagination. He said, Anthony, you have a lawyer visiting. And I said, I don't have a lawyer. The state of Alabama don't give you a lawyer during post-conviction. He said, well, Anthony, somebody's out there pretending to be a lawyer. Why don't you get dressed and go see who it is? I get dressed and I go out there. I introduce myself and this lawyer tells me his name, and he tells me he's from Boston. And I asked the lawyer who sent him. He told me a man by the name of Bryan Stevenson. I asked him who was this Mr. Bryan Stevenson, and he tell me about Bryan Stevenson and how great he is, and he was the CEO of EJI. I never heard of EJI, and he told me the work that they do in Montgomery. And I said, you keep trying to tell me how great this Mr. Bryan Stevenson is. I said, but he can't be that good. I said, for he have already made a fundamental mistake. And he said, what would that mistake be? I said, did you not say you from Boston? He said, yes, I did. I said, well, had Mr. Stevenson checked with me before he sent you here, he would have known that I am a beloved Yankee fan. And there's no way a Yankee fan and a Boston fan could ever do anything together. I said, but for your sake, I'm willing to put my personal feeling aside and let you work on my case. And for the next 3 years, this lawyer would come back every year and tell me what he was trying to do. In the 4th year he came, he said, Anthony, I think I can get you a life without parole. I looked at this lawyer and I said, get who a life without parole? He said, you. I said, life without parole is for guilty people, not innocent people. I said, there's no way I could stand up and plead guilty to something that I didn't do. I said, if the state of Alabama is hell-bent on executing me for something that they know that I didn't do, so be it. I said, you know, all of us at some point in some time must die. I said, I'm not ready to die, and I definitely don't want to die for something that I didn't do, but I could never stand up and say I did something when I didn't do it. I looked at this lawyer and I said, and by the way, today, I needed a lawyer that would believe in me. I needed a lawyer that was willing to go to jail for me if necessary, but since you don't believe in me, I have no choice but to fire you today. The lawyer looked at me and he said, are you serious? I said, yes. I said, but thank you for what you did and what you were trying to do. I said, I don't know whether you will ever be able to understand what I'm about to tell you. I said, but I remember because I was 12 years old, my mother told me that if I'm man enough to bend down and pick up a rock, and if I'm man enough to throw that rock, I should be man enough to say I threw that rock. I said, this is one rock that I didn't throw. Therefore, I could never say that I threw this rock when I didn't. I said, I thank you. And as he was going out the front door and they was leading me back to my cell, something in my mind said, you got to be the dumbest person in the world. You fired the only lawyer that you had. And just as that thought into my mind, something said, you did the right thing. Always stand up for what you believe in. Always stand up for principle. And as I got closer to my cell, one of the guards was watching TV, and I asked him, what was he watching? And he told me he was watching his lawyer out of Montgomery. And I asked him, could I stand there and listen? And Bryan Stevenson was on TV. Bryan Stevenson was talking about why we don't need a death penalty in this country. I cannot explain it to you, but the moment I heard this man speak, I knew this is the man that I needed to represent me. So that night I wrote Mr. Stevenson a letter thanking him for sending the lawyer from Boston. I told Mr. Stevenson that I would like for him to consider being my lawyer. I said, but before you say yes or no, all I ask is that you read my transcript. And if you find one thing in my transcript that point to my guilt, do not worry about becoming my lawyer. Do not send me another lawyer. I am perfectly willing to die for something that I didn't do. 3 months later, I get a reply from Mr. Stevenson saying that he would read my transcript. 5 months later, I get a letter saying that he had called the prison and he would be down to see me. The moment I shook this man's hand, I knew that God had sent me his best. We sit there for a moment and we talked about our childhood and where he was from and where I was from and what I liked to play and what he liked to play. And finally we got down to business and I said, Mr. Stevenson, the state of Alabama is saying that the gun that they got from my mother's home is the murder weapon. I said, if no two guns is alike, Mr. Stevenson, I already know that the state of Alabama is lying. I said, Mr. Stevenson, I know how you lawyers are. You don't like for inmates to tell you how to do your job. I said, but I need a favor. He looked at me and he said, what is that favor? I said, I need you to hire a ballistic expert. Mr. Stevenson looked at me and he said, well, I was going to do that anyway. And I said, no, Mr. Stevenson. I'm not explaining myself right. I said, Mr. Stevenson, I need you to hire a white man. And I need this white man to be from the South. I said, Mr. Stevenson, all my life, I lived in the South. And I know how the South operates. I said, Mr. Stevenson, you can go out and get the best white female in the country. Her word is no good on that witness stand. And I said, Mr. Stevenson, you know it cannot be a person of color. No matter how good she can be or he can be, her word is no good. I said, Mr. Stevenson, I need you to find me a Southern white man. I need this Southern white man to believe in the death penalty. I need him to be the best of the best. I said, but above all of that, I just need him to tell the truth. Mr. Stevenson left that day, and about 3 months later, I got word to call him, and I called him, and he said, Anthony, I found 3 of the world-renowned known experts. 2 of them live in Texas, and 1 of them live in Virginia. He said, they are the best of the best. I said, Mr. Stevenson, did you remember to ask them would they just tell the truth? He said, all 3 of them said they would tell exactly what the evidence shows. He said, but Anthony, I need to tell you something. These 3 experts testified 98% of the time for the prosecution. They have never testified for the defense. Are you sure these are the experts that you want? And I said, yes. I said, Mr. Stevenson, if you can hire those 3 experts, hire those 3 experts. I can't tell you what month, what year they came to Alabama, but they came on 3 separate occasions. They all did their finding, and they did something that I didn't learn until I was out, that each one of them tried to make the gun match, but it still wouldn't match. We took this new finding to the Attorney General, who at the time was a man by the name of Bill Pryor. And Bill Pryor was quoted as saying that it would be a waste of the taxpayer money to take 1 hour to re-examine the bullets. Bill Pryor said it would be a waste of his time to re-examine those bullets, and as far as he's concerned, the right man was on death row, and for not doing his job, George W. Bush appointed him to a federal lifetime appointment. We goes before another Attorney General by the name of Troy Keene, and he too refused to take 1 hour to re-examine the bullets. And then he loses in the next election, and a man by the name of Luther Strand. We go to him, and he too refused. And for not doing his job, Luther Strand became the Senate when Jeff Sessions became the Attorney General. I sit on death row 16 more years because my life was not worth 1 hour. And finally, Mr. Stevenson came to me and he said, the judges in Alabama is not going to do the right thing. I need your permission to take your case to the United States Supreme Court. Well, in that 16 years, I lost the love of my life, my mother. And when I lost my mother, I told Mr. Stevenson I didn't give a damn about this case. As far as I'm concerned, the state of Alabama can execute me today. But Mr. Stevenson, being the fighter that he was, He filed my case to the United States Supreme Court. 2 years after filing, this United States Supreme Court did something that they have never done in the history of the courts. All 9 justices ruled in my favor. They send the court back to Alabama. We goes before the trial judge. The prosecution stand up and say, Your Honor, it is with great sadness that I have to inform this court that we have lost the gun in question. The judge give them time to find the gun. We goes back to court. The prosecution stand up and say, Your Honor, it is with great pleasure that I informed this court that we did find the gun in question. But it is only with deepest sadness, Your Honor, that I have to inform you that we have lost the bullets. All of this time, I am still sitting on death row. And while we thought that they had lost the bullet, we found out that the prosecution had called one of his experts who testified 30 years ago that the bullets match, asked him to come and re-examine the bullets one last time. And when he examined the bullets, he was quoted as saying, "The bullets do not match. I do not see what I saw 30 years ago." But he saw exactly what he had saw 30 years ago. My life as a black man was not important. 30 years I lived in this hell because some racist white man didn't like the color of my skin. And the state of Alabama had every intention of executing me for a crime they knew that I didn't commit. The state of Alabama was seeking justice, and that justice was my life. I have to ask you, New York, where is my justice? Who do I get justice from? 30 years of my life that I could have spent with my mother, but I didn't because somebody hated me enough to put me away. And to this day, April the 3rd of this year, I would be out 3 years. And nobody in the state of Alabama have had the decency to say I'm sorry. Every day I wrestle with why I haven't been given an apology. To this day, I do not like to use race as an excuse. I have tried my best to think of something why the state of Alabama refused to apologize. But for whatever reason, and the only reason is the white men in Alabama do not feel that they have to apologize to a man of color. 30 years of pure hell. I wrote that book, The Sun Does Shine, because in this hell I decided that I would live. In this book I decided that the state of Alabama could take my future. The state of Alabama could take my freedom. But what the state of Alabama couldn't take was my joy. The joy that I'm talking about is the joy that the world cannot give you, and the world cannot take it back. In this book, I talk about love because my mother didn't only tell me about love, she showed me love. My mother showed me compassion. And in this book, not only do I talk about love, I talk about friendship, because I was blessed with a friend who visited me every month for 30 years. I was blessed with a friend who put and came to see me 10,999 times. I don't know, have you seen it, but I asked a question, and his name is Lester. And I asked the question, do you have a Lester? In this book, I put the legal system on trial. And in this book, I put you on trial. In the back of the last chapter of this book, I ask you, for those of you who might believe in the death penalty, I ask you in the back of this book, can you tell who is guilty just by reading their name? Because my name was once on this list. In the back of this book, for those of you who read it, I want you to call out 10 names, and every 10 names say innocent. Because 1 out of every 10 men and women that sits on death row in this country is innocent. The thing that I find trouble is in this wealthy country, that we don't have enough lawyers to represent the poor. Had it not been for equal justice, had it not been for the founder, Bryan Stevenson, I would not be here today. Because the system, if you cannot afford it, let's call a spade, they don't give a damn. In this book, I tell you what my great friend, Mr. Bryan Stevenson, is saying, that this system treat a rich man better if he was guilty than he would a poor man if he was innocent. This is the system that we have. And we all been blind to the fact that justice is blind. But I'm here tonight to tell you that justice is not blind. She can see. She know what race you are. She know what college you went to. She know what neighborhood you live in. She know who you know. And above all, she knows something that none of you want her to know. She know exactly how much money you have in the bank. And when you find yourself in her courtroom, she have already put these things together. And it have already been determined whether you're going to be found innocent or guilty. We have two sets of justice in this country. For those who've been blessed to have money, they can buy justice. But for those of us that don't have money, we are the one that are going to fill the penitentiaries up. We are the one that we are allowing the government to kill innocent people every day in this country. And we sit here and we do nothing, we say nothing. I'm hoping this book, when you read it, will open up your heart, make you stand up and say, no, not again. 30 years, I have always believed in freedom. I have always believed that in the only way for any of us to be free, you must forgive. In this book, I can't wait for you to read and see how I befriended a man that I didn't even know at the time was a Klansman. But he became my best friend because he was taught to hate all his life. And when I realized who I was talking to, I began to know him more and more. I set up a book club in the prison, and he was the one that I chose to be a member of the book club. we don't have to live with each other, but we definitely don't have to hate one another. This book, in my honest opinion, is the second best book that ever been written. I kind of know the author of that book, and I know he just wouldn't write no bull. He gonna write the truth. In this book, I was fortunate enough to get a publisher, St. Martin. And in this book, if you read this book and don't like that book, stand up. Mr. George. If you don't like this book, tonight get his address and his phone number and he will refund you your money back. Because this book is going to open up your heart. This book is going to make you see a justice system that you thought was fair. This book will make you laugh, but it also will make you cry. And I often tell my audience, there's 3 things you need when you read this book. You need some Kleenex. You need some Oreo cookies. And you need a glass of cold milk. Because this book, you will not be able to put it down. Put your phone on silence. Once you start reading this book, I promise you, you will stand up and cheer that finally someone wrote a book that not only would enhance your life, but people that you know, call them and tell them to buy this book. Because this book deals with a system that we have far too long ignored. I love the fact that I was able to forgive those 8 racist white men that put me in prison just because they could. I want you to know that neither one of them have had the decency to call me, to text me, to write me and say, Mr. Hinton, I'm sorry. But I don't look for an apology. I get up every morning after laying down for 30 years with a death sentence over my head every morning, every night. The state of Alabama took a piece of me every day by the fact that I was on death row. I decided that somebody needed the story to be told. What we do in this country and how we treat our own citizens. Every day the government kills in your name. And no matter how you go into that bathroom and wash your hands, that innocent blood is still on your hand. I need every one of you to join me in helping me to do away with the death penalty. This book will introduce you to some of the greatest men that I met, but they all made a mistake. And in the famous words of Jesus, who caught the woman in adultery, he who is here without sin, let him or her cast the first stone. These men that I write about made a bad choice. Do we want to follow their example by making the choice that they made? I truly believe that we are better than that. And I truly believe that it is time that we start acting better than what we say. Everywhere I go, people ask me, how did you become even to begin to forgive those men? I want to leave you tonight. I want you to know forgiveness is not about the other person. Forgiveness is about you. I didn't forgive those 8 racist white men because they asked me to. I didn't forgive them so they could sleep good at night. I forgave them so I could sleep good at night. That is what forgiveness is all about. You. And I have to ask you, what would you do if you were charged with a crime that you didn't commit? What would you do if you didn't have the money to pay for a legal defense? What would you do if you passed a polygraph test but yet no one believed in you? What would you do if the system cared more about the color of your skin than they do the merits of the case? What would you do if you were sentenced to death? What would you do if you had to spend the rest of your life in a room the size of your bathroom? What would you do if you had been waiting all your life to die? How would you come? What would you become? What would you do? After 30 years, you was finally set free. Who would you be? Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for speaking. I think we have time for a couple of questions. There's a gentleman right there. No problem.
I do want to thank you so much for so generously sharing your brutal experiences. And also, I think that what you have put to paper to describe a very unjust criminal system, not justice, in Alabama, frankly, it happens to be an American issue. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, even it seems if the death penalty were ended, we would still represent the low-hanging fruit, because police departments around this country build their budgets on our black lives. Mm-hmm. We feel that they matter, our lives. The prosecutors, the courts, this massive prison system around which an entire economy is based, food services, toilet paper, everything. We're the low-hanging fruit. My question then is, where do you see this issue going if, in fact, my description is as corrupt as I think it is?
Well, first and foremost, there's over 2 million men and women in prison in this country. We have more men and women in prison than some third world country is in population. For those who've been out of touch with the justice system is the number one money-making thing in America. Somebody is getting filthy rich off sending men and women of color to prison. It is also a form, in my honest opinion, a form of slavery. Slavery was outdone, but they came and created another way to have slavery. Every day that a man go up before a judge, he is auctioned off, whether he gonna get 10 years, 100 years, or 30 years. As I said before, I only can tell you that we need to start learning who to vote for and how to vote. We need to stop just going to the ballot and just voting on racist line and gender line, when we need to educate ourselves on who we put in office. And we need to start sending a message to those politicians. Either you start working for the people, or we're going to vote you out of office. And once you send that clear message, I do believe the next politician will go in there and try to clean up this mess. I don't disagree with anything you had to say. I lived it. I know about the toilet paper, the soap, and all. Somebody is getting filthy rich, and the taxpayer is footing the bill. And it should be high time that you as a taxpayer, regardless of race, say enough is enough, and let's start putting people in office that truly gonna care and truly gonna start doing what they need to do not just about black lives, but all lives matter to me. And I just hope that the day will come. I often tell young people, this future is yours. You can stand and sit here and do nothing, or you can inherit a corrupt system. Your children, your grandchildren will get caught up in it at some point in time. You need to take a stand now, and let's make this system better. Yes, sir.
Did your exoneration restore your right to vote?
It did. I haven't missed a vote since I got out, and I've been trying to put them bastards out of office ever since. And I'm one of those, I don't talk the talk, I walk the walk. And when I got out of prison the first day, I asked my attorney, Mr. Stevenson, I said, if there's two things I want, if somehow you can make an arrangement where I can just tell my story, and I want to be able to get my voting right. And I restored my voting right, went through the FBI, they restored it, and I haven't missed a vote since. And I often tell people, if you don't vote, don't complain. If you get caught up in a system that is not fair to you, when you get caught up in it, say, I should at least use my right to vote. And I just really don't understand how African Americans don't vote, because I remember during the civil rights, that's what they was marching for people to vote. Women, white, at one time you couldn't vote. And so I don't understand why you got this right to vote and now you will not use it. But every time there is an election, I get on the computer and I try to find out as much information about that candidate that I can. Yesterday I had the privilege of talking to a man that is running for the Attorney General. First thing I wanted to know, where do you stand on the death penalty? Because I'm not afraid to ask the hard question. And he did give me a satisfaction answer, but I also know that it's politics. And so I'm going to do some more research on this man that is running for the Attorney General. And that's what all of us should do. Start using these computers for what they should have designed for, and stay off Facebook and all that Twitter stuff, and get involved in your community and put people in office that is there to help you. You know, I often tell people, and I have to say this, in Alabama, there is some white men on Alabama death row. You are not exempt from being locked up. And we need to stop this notion thinking that prison is just all about blacks, but there are some white people get caught up in the system too. And I know why they get caught up in the system. But I need every man to put down your colored pencil or pen and start, let's doing what make it right for every citizen in this country. I truly believe that we have and could be one of the best countries in the world. But we got to get away from all of this foolishness. In this book, again, I hope young people will read it and learn that it's okay to forgive. It's even okay to forgive those who have suppressed you for 30 long years. Because at the end of this journey, I want to be able to say I won and they lost. And I want to be an example to young men and young women that it's okay to have love and compassion for someone. It's okay to love someone you don't even know. It's okay to have trials and tribulation. I truly believe that God will let us go through something, but I don't believe he will let us go through anything that he can't bring us out whole. And as I said, I talked to a lawyer. If anything, this country needs more lawyer that is dedicated to making this system fair for everybody. And sometimes you may not get the money that you deserve. You may not even get a thank you. But what about doing it for the word justice? Because I truly believe, as Martin Luther King believed, injustice is a threat to everybody, no matter what state, no matter what country you're in. We need to fight for justice in this country. And the only way you can fight for justice is you start reading and you start looking on the internet and find out more and more and become active in your community. Put the right people in office. and I hate to say this, but I really believe that I wish the Senate was just full of nothing but women.
Got a question in the back.
I wanted to ask you, do private prisons also take in death row inmates?
No private prison, the state will not send death row inmate. They only send general population.
Because I kind of feel like they should be abolished because it is a lot of revenue that they take in.
Well, private prison have taken over because the state can make more money by allowing private prison to take over. They just pay the state a percentage of whatever they, 30%, 60%, whatever. And the thing about that, prison have become a form of economic for somebody. And you, the taxpayer, burden. Right there in Alabama, they had private prison, and they moved the prison from Alabama to Louisiana, where now they disconnect the family connection. Family can't drive to Louisiana and see their loved one. So there's a lot of things that goes on that we just sit back and don't realize. And I often tell people, what affect me today could very well affect you tomorrow, or someone you love or someone you care about. But they will never move death row inmate to another state or to another private facility.
We have time for one more question.
Thank you. And thanks for sharing your story.
Thank
You mentioned that your first member of your book club was a Klans member. I'd love to know what sort of books you recommended and that you read in the book group.
Well, the first book that we read in the book club, in the book I tell how I had to first win over the warden. This warden was a matlock. You had to really convince him that the book club that I wanted to start, it had no gimmick. We wasn't trying to escape. We wasn't in there to talk about escaping or anything. And so once I won the warden over, and I told him that if we could somehow start a book club, I believe it would be better for death row inmate, because all we did was sit around 24/7, 365 days, and had nothing to do. And this way they would read books and they would put their mind on something else instead of thinking about throwing something out there on his officer. The moment I said, your officer, and he said, okay, I'll think about it. And so once he gave me the permission, we had to get someone from the outside to call Amazon.com or whatever and send the books into the prison. They didn't allow parents or sisters or brothers to send books. They had to come from a bookstore. And the first book I introduced my book club to was James Baldwin, Go Tell It on the Mountain. And this book I knew would draw interest, and it was 6 of us. And what I did to this day, don't understand, a book, 6 people read the book, and 6 people all had different opinion about the book. That is what I loved about the book. But it's kind of baffling to me that 6 people can read the same thing and get different opinion about it. And I guess that's what makes book reading and being able to discuss a book. But in prison, I don't think we as citizens realize that half of the people in prison is there because they didn't get an education on the street. I had the privilege of asking young men, what grade did you drop out of school? And everyone that I asked dropped out at the 7th and 8th grade. I was only one of 5 men that had graduated from high school, and there was 200 men, and every one of them had dropped out the 7th and 8th grade. I don't understand how this system worked, but first I had a mother that wouldn't dare let me drop out of school in the 7th grade. I just never understood how the police or protective service didn't go in and make these kids go to school. And so I started a book club that some couldn't read. And so you had to read the book to them and for them. And then as they heard the book, they would tell me their feedback. I think it was one of the most successful book club that I had until they started executing the members of the book club. And finally, the new generation came in and they weren't into reading the book, and I shut the book club down. But James Baldwin, Go Tell It on the Mountain, some liked it because it had talks about a little sex. Some liked it because it talked about he was being angry with his father. Some liked it because of John. They can relate to John. But not to give away, because I don't know who you have read. When you read this book, and I talk about Go Tell It on the Mountain, I want you to read it and remember this man named Henry Francis Hayes, a KKK member. And I want you to read what he told me after reading this book. And don't tell me. I believe that as good as we can control people and teach them to hate, we can also teach them to love. And the night of Henry Hayes' execution, Henry Hayes was asked, did he have any final words? And Henry Hayes said, all of my life I've been taught to hate black people. All of my life. Henry said, but tonight, I leave this world knowing what true love feel like, and I learned it from the very people I learned it from the very people that my mother and father taught me to hate. I often ask questions. My friend and I be driving, and I said, what happened that no one protected this young man? Where was protective service? Where was the police when this man was being brainwashed to hate people simply because of the color of his skin? And where was this society that loved to get out in public and say that it takes a village to raise a child? Well, this same village sentenced this man to death. This same village said this world would be better off if you wasn't in it. I think if we are truly true to ourselves, we are a hypocrite society. I think Henry Hayes deserved it to live, and although Henry Hayes did a horrible thing, but I also have to look at that Henry Hayes was brainwashed, and the records indicate that he was brainwashed. And I just think that we need to start showing more love toward one another. We need to start showing more compassion toward one another. And perhaps we might be able to stop something from like this from happening again. And again, thank you, ladies and gentlemen.